last thing, so 1911 Syndicate, this is my quick like 30-second pitch for the night, but basically another small local company, but we stay in business based on people being cool with us. So believe it or not, I know it doesn't make sense, but behind like bug out bag classes and we produce a lot of like gun reviews and stuff like that, we're actually a real estate company. I know it's confusing, it's bizarre, but it's like we're a real estate company that really just kind of dedicated to like the 2A military, law enforcement, hunting communities. So we keep the lights on just based on cool people keeping us in mind when that day comes up, or they hear a friend who needs to buy a house. Doesn't have to be like some prepper pad or anything like that. Like literally it can be a house in West Valley. That's cool. So just keep us in mind with that. That's all I'll say about that. Cards and stickers and stuff like that up there for any of you guys who need it. And then, yeah, so tonight's class on bug out bags. So Jeff, 28 and a half. Right, the half is important.
Half's
28
important.
and a half years as a Green Beret, and then on top of all that, created the RATS tourniquet, which if you came to our last class, you got a RATS tourniquet, an author, and I don't know how he does all the stuff he does. I don't get it. I can barely manage a dog, and Jeff manages like 10 businesses and tourniquets and all kinds of other stuff. So anyway, you guys help me welcome up Jeff, and we'll kick it off.
Did everybody get one of these? So you don't get lost with my rambling.
Case of the chairs.
Everybody else get one? Oh, need one there. There we go. And you all want to stand or?
We'll grab one.
Okay. You're welcome to stand. Standing room only.
You get two over here. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There you go. Okay, so about 8 years ago, I found myself in Africa. We were about a 3.5-hour plane flight from anything. So we were deep, dark garden spot of Africa where everybody was pretty busy waging war against each other. And so I was in there as an advisor, and it was me and 2 other Americans who were actually the only guys that were there. And so anyways, the people that we were advising, so to speak, were, to call them shady would be the understatement of the, of the century. So they're, a conglomerate of pirates and thieves and whatnot, but they happen to be helping to push forward like some of the stuff that we wanted for the global war on terror. Well, the problem that you run into with folks like that is they tend to change their mind. In Africa, that term, if you've ever seen that term, this is Africa, it's very real. So that being this Africa, at some point these guys figured out their leader, who had been a pirate before he'd come over there, decided, hey, let's kill the Americans, and then they'll just send in more guys and we'll get more money. And so, which makes absolutely no sense, but if you've been to Africa, it makes all the sense in the world. And so anyways, we, like any other of programs that we were working in, we had guys that were embedded that we had on the payroll that were feeding us information. So we had one of these guys came up to us and said, hey, they're planning to murder you. So, we're living with these guys. There's 200 of them. Everybody's armed to the teeth. And it was like, oh, really? And you kind of play it down a little bit and you're like, okay, well. So you kind of wait because you want to get more than one confirmation even on something like that, because, it's one of those things where it's like you don't want to call back and go, hey, these guys are going to kill us and so we need to get out of here, because you don't want to come across like the boy who cried wolf. So about a week later, one of our other plants, these guys didn't know each other, so they're independent sources in intel lingo. Another guy comes up to us and he says, hey, they're going to murder you guys, so you probably better leave. So mind you, we're 3 hours, 3.5-hour plane flight out in the middle of East Jabib nowhere. And so then it was like one of those moments where it was like, oh, this just got really real. And at that point, I had multiple years doing combat operations, but it was one of those ones where I was used to having, 100 assaulters with me, and, and we had fast movers and artillery support or whatever. And then all of a sudden it was me and 2 other guys and, dressed like this. And it was like, okay, what am I going to take with me if we have to run? Because the second part of the story is when we called for emergency exfil, the guys that were supposed to be listening weren't. And so it was, things got pretty interesting. And so anyways, fast forward about 4 years ago when we started up Ready Man, Jason, Jason's my business partner as well as co-author in Black Autumn, if any of you guys have read our fictional novel. But he came up to me and asked me one time, he said, hey, if we're gonna do a bug out exercise because I want to test this stuff out, what do you recommend? And I was like, well, I'll tell you what I recommend, you know. And then it kind of went from there, and we actually did a series of tests that we're going through to figure out what is the best way, what do you need to bug out? And it actually kind of changed the way that we looked at things that we pack and things that we have with us, where we're going and whatnot. And so all of that stuff is what we're going to go over tonight. So this is, since lessons learned, it's by no means, you know, the gospel truth, but it's the truth as too much caffeine, can't get the cursor on there. The truth as far as we've been able to figure out so far. So like Jake had mentioned to us, like mentioned before, I was a Green Beret for about 28 years, and intermixed in there, I was a cop. I got out and then went back because the war kicked off, and I was in a counter-terrorist unit, and I racked up a whole bunch of time overseas in Afghanistan and Iraq, and then later on in Africa. And so these are some of the things that we learned, and the way that we started conducting ourselves at the beginning of the war changed greatly towards the end of the war. All of a sudden, you know, when we were first going out, we were carrying a whole bunch of junk on us, and then as the war progressed, we realized we couldn't do that and sustain if we had to walk or move or whatnot. And so food and some of the other stuff that you'd think that you would need kind of got tossed off to the side and in favor of some of the other things. So throughout the course of this discussion, and I call it a discussion because if you have questions or comments or whatnot, or hey Jeff, this is what I do, then please raise your hand and share your experience with other folks, your questions. The only dumb questions are the ones that you don't ask. Okay, so I think there's some meme on Sun Tzu that's going around that's like, you know, a person who asks a question is dumb for 5 minutes, a person who doesn't ask a question is dumb for the rest of their life. And so ask the question. So the handout that I handed you guys, this is our perspective of what we figured out when we were testing out a bug out. So to paint the picture for you, for the bug out scenario that we were testing here in Utah, we had 5 guys, we were moving 50 miles underweight at night, and we wanted to test how long that it took to get there. And there was no rules except for you couldn't use a vehicle. I tried that and I got shot down by everybody else. I was like, I'm just gonna drive. And they were like, nice try, no. And then we progressed from there, and we used everything. One of the guys had a skateboard that he went on where he turfed pretty good at some point, but we had a minimal packing list, and away we went. So when we're talking about bug out versus get home, I like to, when I discuss, if any of you guys have been in any of my other seminars or talks or whatever, I like to equate everything to probability of threat. So what is your probability of threat? And so if you think about the title of this, your probability of threat is you're going to have to go home. And home is probably the number one choice of where you'd want to go anyways, because for several different reasons that we're going to talk about. So is it a bug out bag or is it a get home bag? I like to think of it as kind of like a get home bag, because the apocalypse probably is not going to happen. I don't know, coronavirus may prove us all wrong, but likely, more than likely, you're going to have to get back home because you've got a flat tire and you forgot to fill up the spare, or you were on the spare and you blew that spare, you know, or you've got the wrong wrench size. How many of you have gone through your tools in your car and checked to make sure? Well, I didn't, and fortunately I had a flat tire in my driveway, and so my wife's car and I ran over a nail, had the wrench that I pulled out of the car itself, and guess what? Didn't fit the lug nuts. Now, fortunately, I carry a star wrench with everything around there, but with that stuff. But the wrench that was designed for that vehicle didn't fit. Now, if I'd been in East Jabib, wherever, guess what? You're hoofing it. If you don't have cell phone service, you got to hoof it out to some place where you can get some high ground. Okay? So, or vehicle mechanical problems, those happen, don't they? If you were a teenager, you probably ran out of gas at one point or another. Okay? And then, or a fuse breaks, or a failure, or you hit a rock that tears some hose out of your car because you're out four-wheeling your Toyota Corolla because it's designed for that, right? Or your vehicle slides off the road, you get stuck, you can't get out, okay? And you've got to end up walking at some place to get help. And so as we see, as the seasons change, our get home bag should change too, right? And so with that, are we going to be able to get past, maybe if there's flooding, like if you live in the Plain States? Is everybody from Utah? Who's not from Utah? Does everybody live in Utah right now? Everybody lives in Utah. Okay, where are you from?
Tennessee.
Tennessee, so you know all about flooding. And tornadoes, yeah, lovely tornadoes. Okay, anybody else from any other places?
Montana.
Montana, okay, snow, lots of it, and grizzly bears.
Texas.
Texas, heat.
California.
California, liberals. Just joking for all my liberal friends out there. We love you too. Florida, okay, so heat again, and alligators, big bugs. Okay. So that's when we're talking about if you're a trucker, you're a long haul trucker or something like that, guess what? Your get home bag, and I'm going to use get home bag and bug out bag is kind of interchangeably at this point because our probability of threat, does everybody buy that? Probability of threat is we're going to get stuck because we're in the mud or in the snow or we bust a tire off or whatever, and all of a sudden we've got to walk back to wherever it is that we can get cell phone service, we hope, so that we can all of a sudden get some help to come out and help us. So now what are we going to take with us to get there so that we can get back home? Because that's our probability of threat. And so this goes into vehicle EDC, but you may not be carrying the EDC with us. So this is your stuff that you're going to be carrying. We have a list that's on that stuff, but I'm going to go over kind of the mantra and kind of the mindset of what you should have when you're going through there, because everybody will change just a little bit. Okay, so what obstacles are between you and getting back home? You know, there may be a nice river that's right there that you can cross and be over there, or you've got to hike all the way back up to where the bridge was that you crossed, whatever that is, or a mudslide or whatever. Or is there just something simply as like a seedy area of town where it's like, hey, you know what, I maybe don't want to walk through there because, you know, it's controlled by the Hells Angels or something like that. I may end up getting jammed up, or I have red hair and people don't like gingers. So avoiding those crime-ridden areas. So, and when we talk about getting back home, the stuff that we want to carry, and I'm going to skip ahead to when we get at the house, bug out bag, bug out location are like these buzz terms that we hear all the time in survival and preppers and emergency preparedness and stuff like that. But the reality is, as soon as you leave your house, you're stepping out into the big unknown, right? You go from an area that you control and know into something that is vastly unknown that you can't possibly hope to control. You can control about this much space, and then that's about it as you're walking along. And your variables go through the roof that'll really come back and bite you in the rear end. So your home is your castle. You guys have heard castle doctrine with the concealed carry stuff. Well, it's very true. You know the area, you know your neighbors, you know your community, you know your family. All of your canned goods and supplies are right there. You'd never put canned goods that you're going to go out and hike with because they weigh too much because of the water. Guess what? You probably have a bunch of that stuff sitting in your house right now that you can subsist off of for long periods of time. And then it's a fixed position. So God forbid, you know, the banditos move in next door to you or something like that. You've got a place that you can defend. Okay, because you know the angles, or at least you should know the angles of awareness that are in your house and the areas that you can defend and the fatal funnels and all of that stuff that's in there. But there are reasons to leave your house or leave your castle. Okay, natural disaster may be one of them. Natural disaster can be like forest fires or the wildfires like what we saw in California, an earthquake, a flood. There's my Tennessee guy at. Or a flood like what's happened. I've got a buddy of mine that's in Tennessee right now, and no, Alabama. And he's like, yeah, we've got, what's that? Sorry. He's from LA, Lower Alabama. He's got about 2 feet of water in his basement. Well, that was about a week ago, so maybe it's all gone now. So flooding. So some of that stuff may force you to leave your house. Katrina, perfect example of that. You know, if there's a gas leak, you're probably not going to hang out. They're going to force you to leave until it gets taken care of. The wildfires, you know, if your house is, you know, going to burn down or something, or just a bad element. You moved in there 10 years ago and it was a nice neighborhood, and then it just took a downturn because people like, you know, Jake moved in, and it just, it's the red hair. It's the red hair, yeah, like Eric there. So, okay, so you figure out, you're like, okay, well, I have to leave, okay? And so what are your considerations? This is one of the stuff that doesn't come out very often. If you look in the back of that pamphlet that I gave you, it's your bugging out is your tribe. It's one of the articles I wrote, I think it's, I don't know, last few pages that's in there. One is the antis, and then one is your tribe. So your tribe, if you're, for your survival, have you ever heard the term that the chain is only as strong as its weakest link? So guess what? Jared, or this couple right here, their bug out plan is going to be vastly different than Jake's bug out plan. Why?
They have loved ones in front.
Because you're cooler.
Children.
You've got kids, and they've got little kids. Can that little guy walk on his own?
Yes.
He can for
Very quickly.
for, you know, for probably about 50 feet, and then he's going to sit down. And so do you have some means of moving that little guy? Or do you have other kids that are there? Do you have elderly that are with you? Is your mom and dad with you? Or aunt or uncle that you're taking care of? What is their health in the condition they're in? Do they have asthma? Is somebody injured? If you work out a lot, you probably just bounce from injury to injury to injury, kind of like what I do. And so as you're moving through there, these are all considerations that you've got to think about, where it's like, I'm probably not going to be able to move very far. I just did a gnarly pull in my calf, and it's like, guess what? Jeff's time and distance, time just increased, distance just decreased, because I was hobbled up now for about 3 weeks because of an injury or a twisted ankle or whatnot. Are you sick? Do people have the flu or coronavirus, or do they just have asthma, or do they have heart medications that they're on, and they can only exert themselves to such a level? Because living in the fantasy world of saying it's just me and I'm gonna really isn't practical, because you're surrounded by a whole bunch of people, at least you should be, surrounded by a whole bunch of people who love you, that care about you, and you should care about them too. And everybody's going, if we're talking about we're abandoning our castle or leaving our castle for whatever reason. Is everybody tracking on that? So now all of a sudden, it's not just what do you put in your bug out bag. It's like all of a sudden it's like, well, there's my bug out bag, there's my wife's bug out bag, there's my kid's bug out bag, there's my dog's bug out bag. Fido will eat right, and so on and so on. You know, and then also the biggie that catches, you know, as we start, you know, turning the coin on the century, we're not as in shape as we used to be. You know, we fall down, and it's like, wow, I used to bounce back from that, you know, in about 2 hours, and now it's like 2 weeks, where it's like, man, it's friggin' hurt that just keeps on hurting. So when you start thinking about bugging out, what we like to say is we like to think about it in concentric rings. In concentric rings. Does everybody understand what a concentric ring is? So you have lines of defense. Probably the easiest way to think about it is you've got your front line where, you know, the traditional, you've got the good guys and the bad guys. There's no man land in the middle. You've got the front line, and then you have fallback positions, you know, 1 or 2 fallback positions, and then you've got the headquarters element that's back there, and then as you get further back, you've got the supply train, all that stuff. So essentially you've got these concentric rings or these layers of defense. Well, out is the same way, right? So go back to the story about when we were doing this, and it was like, what was Jeff going to do? Well, I was just going to get in my car and drive, because what happens when you can just drive to wherever your bug out location is? Now you can take a whole bunch of stuff, right? All of a sudden I'm not limited as much as if it's going on my back. And I've got wheels and I've got, you know, an internal combustion engine that can haul stuff, even better yet, if I have a trailer, and I can take that stuff with me. So the first ring that we like to talk about on bugging out is we start the easiest to the hardest. You know, the most obvious to the least obvious. So we're not just starting out walking out on foot. That's not smart, right? We want to be smart. Where we're going to take our car or cars. So one car could be the lead vehicle, going to be abandoned, but it's a supply car. So just another airplane flies up and refuels the other plane so that it can take off, same thing. So now all of a sudden you've got a supply train if that works, but there's nothing wrong with that. There's like cheating so that you can get to your bug out location, okay? Car takes your supply vehicle. And then after that, you can pull a motorcycle or an ATV or a quad or something on a trailer that's out there, or an OHV that you can throw on a trailer and you can haul with you. So if you hit one of those obstacles that's along the way where you have to stop because you've got mud or flood or, you know, debris that's out into the road, now all of a sudden you've got a means that you can get around that, like with a motorcycle or with an OHV or whatnot. You know, and maybe you had your chainsaw with you can throw in the OHV so you can cut your way through and drag stuff out of the way. Okay, and then if you plan it right, your OHV will end up pulling your trailer for you too. So stuff that was in the vehicle can now go into the trailer, and you can actually, has anybody ever done off-road movement like that? It's amazing where those vehicles can go. When I was in Afghanistan, they didn't really have roads in the mountains. They were more like old rivers that had been dry for about 1,000 years. And you'd drive through there and there's like big boulders and junk in there. And we were in Toyota trucks. And, you know, and it's essentially like technical off-roading while you're driving. And never fail, you'd come around a corner and there'd be like a Toyota Corolla sitting there. And you're like, how did you get here? You know, and it'd be stuffed full of people, you know, and they're hanging out the windows and they're driving through. So never underestimate, you know, with a little bit of skill and tenacity and creativity where you can go with that. And so all of a sudden you start doing overland movements, especially with an OHV or something, pulling a trailer. If you have to, you can unhook that trailer, dump all the stuff off of it, pick that trailer up, lift it over the obstacle, put everything back on the trailer, push the OHV over, and boom, and away you go again. A little bit of work, but off you go. Okay, bicycle. So bicycle is another fantastic thing because bikes will go just about anywhere. The North Vietnamese, when they were coming down, so some of you guys are still young, but you know, when we were in the war in Vietnam back in the late 60s, right? You had Vietnam was this long, skinny country, and then you had Laos and Cambodia that were over on the side. So we wouldn't go over there, so politics hasn't changed much, right? Afghanistan, Pakistan, can't go into Pakistan after the bad guys, go figure. So Vietnam were fighting the Vietnamese, couldn't go into Laos or Cambodia. So what the North Vietnamese would do is they'd jump over the border and they'd go down this trail, it was called the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and they would bring supplies, war supplies, into South Vietnam. One of the main ways that they do that, they'd have trucks and stuff, but one of the main ways that they do that would be by bicycle. So they'd get these bicycles, they'd load them up with hundreds of pounds of stuff, and then they'd have a couple of guys on them, and they'd just wheel these things down all the way down the Ho Chi Minh Trail and then back in so that they could feed the insurgency, the Viet Cong, that was in South Vietnam. So bicycle is a fantastic way to move. Jason, actually, when he did his bug out, he used a bicycle that had a trailer on it, and he just biked all the way over. We started from our homes, we went over the hill into over the mountain, and then into Stockton. He went around the mountain and then into Stockton. Okay, wagons. So you know the Mormons cross the plains with hand carts. So it can be done. The little red wagon that some of you guys have with kids, guess what? What's a great way to carry kids? Drop them in the wagon and pull that wagon. A heck of a lot easier than dragging that, you know, trying to carry that child, you know, for miles and miles and miles. Remember, the more that you fatigue, and the thing you're going to hear me over and over again is limit your time under stress. Limit your time under stress. The more you can limit your time under stress, the less difficulty you're going to run into, the less chance of not fatigue, exhaustion that's going to hit you. Because if all of a sudden, if it's a 50-mile movement and it takes you 2 weeks instead of 2 days, guess what? That's a heck of a lot of time out into the elements where you're open to injury or sickness and whatnot. So the idea, what we figured, we want to go ultra light, where we're moving as fast as possible with us and with, or if it's just us. Okay, so the wagons, and then of course on foot is kind of your last ditch effort, where it's like, okay, I can't take my bike anymore because the tires have come off or whatever. I bent the rims and it's not rolling. So all of a sudden I figured out that I've got to walk. So, and of course that goes without saying, good shoes, tough feet, toughening up the feet, and first aid for blisters. Number one limiting factor. Any questions so far? Guys are all just enthralled.
I got one question with taking a vehicle, and especially if you have it built out with supplies, what considerations do you go into in staying with the vehicle versus leaving the vehicle and going on foot?
Well,
Yeah.
comes into where are you going, right? What's your destination? If all of a sudden my destination is right over there, I want to keep that vehicle. The vehicle is, I mean, we'd all agree, vehicle's highly valuable piece of equipment to have with you, because there's so many different things that you can do with a vehicle. I mean, it's shelter, it's also movement, it's also a workhorse that can move supplies, or if somebody gets sick or injured or whatnot, you can get them to the hospital. So, but if all of a sudden my vehicle breaks down and I've still got 20 miles to go, probably going to leave it so that I can get to what my destination is. Good question. Okay, so where are you going? Do you have a destination in mind? One of the things that we tell folks is, don't leave your house unless you're going somewhere. Don't leave your house unless you're going somewhere. Have a goal, a destination in mind of where that is. Okay? Try to not do Utah to Florida unless, there's not a big problem. But have a destination of where you're going, and that comes into for a variety of reasons. And do you have a prepared location? Okay, you don't have to have a prepared secret bunker location that's in the mountains. Your prepared location may be a family member, probably is a family member, mom, dad, uncle, brother, sister, friend, farmer that you met at the bar and became friends with. Doesn't matter, where there's some place where his place is somewhat prepared, and maybe even if you've got enough of a relationship, he's allowed you to store some stuff there, just in the eventuality that the 100-year flood comes through, or the tornadoes, or wildfire, that it's like, hey, I live in California for some crazy reason because I think I like it, but wildfires hit all the time, and so can I store some stuff in your barn, because I'm probably going to get chased out of my house. So, but I want to look cool, so I'm going to stay there. But when I show up on your doorstep, then I'll have some stuff there. So it's a prepared location that's already there. So now all of a sudden you're not depleting their supplies. It's there, and all of a sudden you've heard the thing where it's like a guest is wearing out your welcome after so many days. One of the main ways to not wear out your welcome is pull your weight. Okay, family, friends, relatives. Are they prepared to accept you? Do they have supplies? So just showing up on their doorstep. How many of you have read the Jakarta Pandemic? It's kind of timely, actually, right now. I'd recommend everybody read it. It's called the Jakarta Pandemic. It's a flu that hits and spreads across the world and starts killing everybody. But prior to that, it starts talking about, I think the author captured the psychology of kind of where people are going. Some are living in denial, some are preparing and whatnot. And then all of a sudden, like, family members and friends just start showing up on people's doorsteps. And it's like, we're here, you're going to help us, right? And it's like, no, because you might have the flu, back up or whatever that is. Okay, so, and they've only got X amount of supplies because they weren't figuring about for those other people. Okay, and then do you know your neighbors? It starts with your tribe, right? So maybe your bug out location is 3 houses down the street because your house is the one that has the gas leak. Do you know your neighbors? Is your family close by? Your tribe starts with you, and then your wife, your spouse, your kids, then your neighbors, and then your community, and then your family or extended family that's out there. You know, it was a big revelation when we were reading Black Autumn, or when we were reading it, yeah, when we wrote Black Autumn. So that's just a big wargaming exercise about, you know, the apocalypse, or, you know, the world stumbles, and it's a wargaming exercise that Jason and I went through, and that takes place here in Utah. And as we were going through there and we were figuring out, hey, if this happens, then what are we going to do? And it's like, oh, I don't know. Okay, let's figure that out. Well, if that happens, what could be the downstream effects that could happen from that? Well, it could possibly be that, well, okay, how would we prepare for that? And one of the biggest things that we figured out was, in the book, there's this place that's called the Homestead. And what we figured out was people started coming to the Homestead because it was like, hey, there's food, there's water, there's shelter, there's security that's there, and all of a sudden, but the Homestead's only got enough food and supplies and all that other good stuff for X amount of people. And so with that, people had to start getting turned away, and there's actually some pretty rough portions of the book where friends and family, or no family, but friends had come to the gate and were like, hey, we've been friends for 20 years. And it's like, yeah, but you never contributed, and sorry, I can't jeopardize these people that are over there. So from that, what we figured out was, holy cow, one of our main security for our well-being, as well as food and preparedness and whatnot, is to make sure that our community is on board with emergency preparedness as well. Now, that doesn't mean that they have like an Armageddon bunker in their house, but at least they have something that's there that they can help contribute. And getting out there, I think so much so now in modern society, where our community ends up being this thing on the phone, you know, where it's Facebook and Instagram, and it's, well, I talk to people all the time. No, you don't. 70% of communication takes place non-verbally. So how much communication is really taking place? Have you ever heard that thing, don't mad text? How many of you have mad texted your girlfriend or significant other? How did that go for you? No, that's not what I meant. Oh, but it's nonverbal, right? And we're losing 3/4 of what our communication has been and the way that human beings have evolved on that. So get out there, get into your community, and help out those folks. And when you're going through, you don't have to come across with, hey, you know, the apocalypse might happen. It could be something as simple as like, hey, all the scientists are saying that we're due for a massive earthquake in Utah, and we're about 100 years overdue. So maybe we should think about that. Or if you live up against a mountain, hey, wildfires happen. What are we doing to mitigate this? And opening up that conversation. Okay, keys to bug out bags. So limit your time under stress. You heard me say that already. Now, I have some examples of some you know, quote unquote bug out bags. Interestingly, when I was in Afghanistan, you guys ever see the pictures of the contractors in Afghanistan and they're all wearing photographer's vests? Well, you know where that idea came from? Because all the Afghans wore photographer's vests and fishing vests, because Afghans are used to getting run out and running for their lives. So all of their essentials were on their vest. And then some of the low-vis military guys and contractors and whatnot were like, hey, that's a really good idea, because I can't run around with a rucksack, so I'm gonna have my essentials with me on my vest that's there, so I can throw it on. Nobody can really see what I've got. Everybody else has one, and I can move, and I'm kind of innocuous. And then also with the added benefit that I can hide a sidearm or something underneath it, and it helps me be concealed. Okay, so something you can consider for your bug out or your get home bag may not be a bag at all. It may be a vest. Okay. So as we went through, and I'm gonna decrease, and then we'll go to the heavy one, because this is the ultra lightweight. But a lot of you folks, these were popular. This is a Mystery Ranch or whatnot. It's pretty much empty, and this thing weighs about 10 pounds already. Okay, we like to say that if you're gonna build your bug out bag or get home bag, you need to be under 20 pounds. That's not counting water or food. You need to be under 20 pounds, so that way you can move. Okay, remember, limiting your time under stress. So all of a sudden when you have something like this, it's got these nice pads there and stuff, but empty, this thing is heavy because it's 1,000 denier cordura, it's got oversized zippers, you know, it's got a bunch of these Fastex buckles that with a bunch of that stuff, it adds up this webbing that goes all over the place. Webbing is heavy. Okay, most of your bags that are out there don't go 1,000 denier anymore. We stopped like in soft, we kind of started getting away from 1,000 denier because you go to 500 denier, it lasts just as long and you've cut the weight in half. And it adds up. Ounces or pounds when you start talking about movement, crawling over walls, or just simply walking. Ounces or pounds. Okay? So then, and this is a good example. So this is a battle box, and I'm sure Battle Box didn't get much inspiration from Mystery Ranch. But this is a great bag. So I go out and I walk in the morning. I fill it up with, stuff so that I've got some weight on it. But this is 500 denier cordura, and the weight difference between these two is striking. This is much, much lighter. Much lighter and easier to carry. And so all of a sudden, I'm starting with something that's a lot lighter, and I'm limiting the amount that I'm going to fatigue myself as I'm having to move, okay? I like these because they open up in the front, you know, and you can actually find your stuff that's hidden at the bottom of your bag, you know, that may be in there. So now this is an ultralight. So this probably weighs about, I don't know, well, if I take, this is an ultralight tent, but this is made out of Spectra. So it's, you know, a Spectra like what they put in a ballistic vest. It's made out of Spectra, and this thing probably weighs 2 pounds. So this is an ultra lightweight. We purposely bought these so that we could do the ultra lightweight so that we could get, you know, stay under our 20 pounds. So we're not carrying so much weight. Spectra's got the added benefit of, Spectra is just a fancy word for high density plastic, so it's waterproof. So now it's super simple, very lightweight, thin frame. You know, these aren't designed to carry a ton of weight. You know, you're not going to put a back leg of an elk or something on there, but all of a sudden you can get all of your essentials in here and move. And then this is an ultra lightweight tent. And this, again, this is made out of Spectra as well. So everything taken into consideration to limit as much as possible the weight that you're having to carry on your back. Yep.
With that tin, is that a freestanding or does that have holes to it?
It's freestanding, so you run the lines up. So if you're in a place without timber, you're like, well, okay, you're gonna have to figure something else out, or you know, get on a slope and run it to rocks that are up on a slope or something like that. And then finally, for another example, sometimes you need bags for bags, right? So the cool thing about this bag, and Eric and I have been testing this one, actually, it'll hold about 20 pounds. It's rated for like 20 or 30 pounds. It rolls up nice and compact. It's air weight, but this is Climate. So you guys that camp, you use Climate sleeping pads. So this is super clever. I had never seen this before I actually got it. So the frame in the back pumps up. So now all of a sudden I've got something. I mean, what's lighter than air, right? Helium. Didn't you go to science class? So now all of a sudden I can get my frame, and actually it's pretty stiff. It breathes really well, and it's a lightweight bag. And we can get, you know, we stuff old coffee in here, bags of coffee. You get about 15, 20 bags worth of coffee. So now all of a sudden, when you start talking about ultra lightweight, super compact, you can roll this thing up, throw it in this bigger ruck that it's on there. Hey, I don't want to take that thing. All I need is this little one. Pump it up, throw your stuff in for your essentials, and out the door away you go. So it's pretty cool. Like we literally I just got this. What's that?
Doubles as a pillow. Doubles
as a pillow? Yeah, actually, yeah, or somewhat of a sleeping mat there. So remember, your ounces are pounds and your inches are feet. And what I mean by inches or feet, I'm talking about bulk. So a balloon is super lightweight, but probably not very feasible to walk around with that thing. So what we want to do is we want to combine as many jobs as possible into as few things as possible. So like a Leatherman is a great example. Whole bunch of tools, one little package that's in there, okay? Like what you were talking about with a pillow, your pack that works as a pillow. So you're getting multi-purpose out of as many things as possible so that you're slicing down what that weight is and what you're having to carry. Remember, we have a destination that's in mind of where we're going. We're not going to do this forever. We're not living out of our rucksack. We're going from point A to point B a little bit later on. What was the biggest thing that was kicking everybody's butts? Their feet. They'd get torn up, their feet would get torn up because they weren't necessarily used to moving those distances. Their feet would get wet because they were crossing through streams, because they had the time pressure that was on there. And so they gotta move. And then all of a sudden they've got little, they call them hot spots on blisters. Hot spots turn into blisters. Blisters turn into lacerations. And then that turns into you sitting down with your feet up into the air. Okay, so biggest limiting factor is feet, and those are blisters. Blisters are nothing more than a heat burn that's taking place because something is rubbing. So at one point in my life, Eric and I used to run ultrathons, and so we do a 50-mile runs through the 50-mile runs that were through the mountains down in Provo. The things that you figure out pretty quickly from older guys that had been, to run a bunch of ultrathons is if your foot, you start having a problem with your foot, stop and fix it. Because if you don't, it's kind of like bad news. Bad news doesn't get better with time, so just get it over with. Well, blisters don't get better with time. They just get worse and worse and worse and worse. Okay? And one of the tricks, well, I'll get there. And one of the tricks that we figured out is Krazy Glue. So one of the best things that you can carry is those little tubes of Krazy Glue that should be in your bug out bag. I've put together, some people react and it burns a little bit on them. It'll go away. I'm one of the lucky ones that I haven't. So I've had a blister on my arch that was that big around, and then underneath it, of course, I ignored my own advice. I didn't stop and fix my foot. I just kept going because I was like, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. And finally, when I took my shoe off, my foot was bleeding, the skin had peeled back, and the skin underneath had split, and I had a laceration on my arch. Lovely, yeah, it was awesome. So, anyways, I'm out in the middle of the mountains, and I'm like, okay, what am I going to do here? And I was like, oh, these guys told me about Krazy Glue. I'm going to try it. So I got that little laceration, I glued it shut, and then I got the skin, and I glued the skin back down. And guess what? I was able to move another 20 miles with that. It is probably one of the best ways of handling blisters that I've ever found. Better than duct tape or iodine, tincture benzoin, or any of that other garbage that the military gives you. Okay? So make sure that when you're starting out, you've got well-fitting and your shoes are known. So don't buy a brand new pair of boots that's in your bug out vehicle that it's like, okay, if something happens, these are the shoes that I'm going to wear, because guess what? You'll find out pretty quickly where the hot spots are in that shoe, and now all of a sudden you've limited how far you're going to be able to move. So you've got to get in there. They've got to be well-known shoes, because your shoes all fit a little bit different, don't they? Your church shoes fit very different than your basketball shoes or whatever, your CrossFit shoes or whatnot. Well-fitting socks, 2 layers. You guys ever heard of Injinjis? Injinjis are those funny socks that your individual toes go into. They are the best anti-blister socks known to man. They are fantastic because your toes hold the sock in place. Your sock doesn't roll up underneath your foot that causes a hot spot that causes a blister. Injinjis. If you look up toe socks, they'll be in there. And then over the top of the toe sock, I'm a big fan of Darn Toughs. Darn Toughs are wool socks. They're like, I've worn out one pair of Darn Toughs in the history, and they're like, if you wear them out, send them back. We'll send you some, because they guarantee them for life. So Darn Toughs, they figured out how to get those things so they sit around your foot. The biggest problem that you run into when you're walking is is something starts to roll underneath your foot and you get that hot spot. And once you start getting that hot spot, you've got a blister, and then all of a sudden you've limited your mobility, okay? And then you're back to remembering the Krazy Glue trick. So 2 layers. Foot powder. We don't mess around with foot powder too much out here in the West because it's dry. Back in the East, lots of foot powder, because you're trying to constantly keep your feet dry as much as possible. So when I was in Ranger school after every, you're going through and you're doing these patrols and stuff, and after every patrol they tell you to take your boots off, powder your feet, and change your socks, right? Well, you pretty quickly figure out that it's like when it's raining, which it was like, I don't know, it's like this magical power of Ranger school, it's always raining. And so it's raining, so you open up your rucksack, so everything in your rucksack gets wet. And then you pull out your clean pair of socks and powder your feet, that then turns to goo, and then you put your once dry socks on, now wet socks, back on and stick it into your boot. And so you start to kind of question the intelligence of that. And so anyways, foot powder, quite a bit. It's just cornstarch or talcum powder is what that is. We don't have it too much out here, but big thing back on the East Coast. And then Blister First Aid, we talked about that. Moleskin works good. Do you know what moleskin is? It's kind of like felt with an adhesive back. If you know that you've got a place that you've got a hot spot, you can throw some moleskin on there to prevent it from happening. Duct tape actually works pretty stinking good for protecting your feet because it's slick that's on there. And then, of course, we talked about super glue or Krazy Glue. If you do the Krazy Glue trick, don't use the gel, use the stuff that bonds skin instantly. If you use the gel, it doesn't work, and then all of a sudden you're back to square one. I know that from experience. So use the stuff, and if you buy the cheap stuff from CVS, it works just fine too. Okay? Fatigue. Okay, so fatigue comes in, yeah.
I just have a quick question. So do you have a certain type of shoe or boot that you recommend, like something waterproof or something that can get wet but dries out quick?
It depends. What time of year is it? What do you know? Shoes today are fantastic. Like the military figured out these Bellevue boots, and man, they are the most, it was like, where were these things back in the 80s? I mean, they're fantastic. You put them on and walk for kilometers and kilometers and didn't have any problem with them. So it's whatever you've got that that's on there. And that may be, some Asics running shoes. These are fantastic shoes. They hold up like back in the early days when shoes would fall apart on you and stuff when we were kids. That doesn't really happen as much anymore. Like shoelaces don't break anymore. They used to break all the time. So it's whatever you know. But the thing is get to know what it is you're going to be using and use your gear so that you get to know it. Don't just ad hoc throw something on and think it's going to do you right, because you're flipping a coin at that point. It's a good question. What's that? It's all Met TC. Okay, fatigue. So there's 3 types of fatigue, right? You've got your physical, psychological, and emotional fatigue. So some of you folks that heard my other presentation that I had, like the 3 pillars of preparedness. And that's the physical, psychological, and emotional on that side. So the physical is obviously the physicality. How much are you going to get worn down because you decided that you're going to carry a sword with you on your bug out process, and it's like, man, this thing's really heavy and there's not a lot of orcs out here. So, so you guys are figuring out my sense of humor. Okay, and then the psychological. The contributing factors of the psychological, one is we start to get worn down, we start to lose sleep, we start to revert back to the primal brain, we start losing our ability to do complex thinking, and all we want to do is we start fight or flight, survival mode. Okay, and remember, and then on the emotional side, have any of you guys watched the show Lost? Okay, number 1 determining factor when you can tell somebody's getting ready to self-select is they start talking about their family and looking at their belly button. They start going, oh, you know what? Jake's at home eating a pizza, and I'm out here with bears. And it's not very long after that they go, hey, you know what? I've had enough. I'm out. Okay, so that's the emotional side of that. That's why we say in Ready Man, like the lone wolf in the apocalypse is such a myth that it doesn't exist. It's like as human beings, we have to have community. We evolve that way. That's why we got to the top of the food chain, is because we surround ourselves with other people, other like-minded people that we help support each other. And then on the emotional side, it allows us that we can sit and we can talk and we can vent off stress, lift the weight of the world off our shoulders, get something off your chest, as we say that, as we're removing that weight from ourselves. And this fatigue all of a sudden is going to start weighing on folks depending on how long it is that you're moving. If you're moving from point A to point B and it's only a few hours, not a big deal. But if all of a sudden it becomes a few days, now it starts weighing on you, especially if you don't have a destination in mind of where you're going. You're just wandering, and all of a sudden we start losing purpose, and that psychological side of human beings starts kicking in and really, taking our lunch money. Okay, too much weight in your bug out bag will crush you. You want to try and limit it to 20 pounds. Remember, you're going from point A to point B. We're not talking about living outside of your rucksack. We're talking about moving from a place that's no longer safe, stuck vehicle or wildfire, to a place that is safe. And you want to get there as fast as possible, safely. Okay? If you're out of shape, don't kid yourself. Don't push it too hard. Okay, if you know that you're going to crush yourself doing that, then back off a little bit, so that all of a sudden, when you dig into your anti-inflammatories, like should be part of your bug out bag that's on there, and we'll talk about that, then you're able to keep trooping on and moving forward. Okay, have caffeine and energy pills. So one of our little E&E kits, so bug out's got a couple of different terms. In the military, we call it E&E, or escape and evade. And so we figured, like, we used to take food and all kinds of stuff with us, and then after a while it's like, this stuff weighs too much, and so we just started carrying little gel packs and caffeine pills, because gel packs was plenty of food to keep you going, and then water was the limiting factor that was there. And so, because we knew that if something happened and we got blown off a target or something, at most it was going to be about 3 days, if at that, before they were going to, the CSAR come in and find us. So it was like, look, I've just only got to exist long enough, and gel packs will do that. Remember, you can go a couple of weeks without food. You're not happy, but you can go a couple of weeks without food. Okay, obviously you're limiting your ability to do work, but you can go a while without food. Yep.
So maybe you'll get into this later. Do you have a planned ratio for, best case scenario, my distance will take this long, but I need to plan 3 times that, or 2 times that?
That's it. Yes and no, but it's totally dependent on the person and what your physicality level is, as well as do you have a 2-year-old with you? Because guess what? Your time just increased substantially, and your speed decreased because you've got a little guy or gal that you've got to take with you, or a newborn that you've got to stop and attend to and feed and clean the diaper and all of that stuff that's on there. So it totally depends.
Yeah, let's say though that with all that considering, my plan will take 2 days to get to my destination. Do I stock for 2 or do I stock for 6?
Don't take extra weight.
Okay.
Don't take extra weight if you don't have to. Yeah, we were going through, because it was like, the old saying, 1 is none, 2 is 1. And all of a sudden you just end up with so much stuff that it's, and it's like 100 pounds, forgive my French here, 100 pounds of lightweight shit is 100 pounds. It doesn't matter, it's 100 pounds. And so it's like, all of a sudden it's like, oh, you're trying to walk on that. And some of us older guys, these things just don't work as well as they used to, and they're getting pounded into dust every time you're taking those steps, depending on the foot gear you have, and weight is the biggest determining factor on that. 20 pounds is super, just about, anybody can move with 20 pounds, and you can move pretty fast without getting exhausted. You start busting that 20-pound threshold, and there's a list on the very last page there that's 18 pounds, and it's pretty much just the essentials that are there. Yeah, as soon as you start going above that, it starts grinding you down more and more and more. And then be prepared to support your family. Okay, H2O. This is obviously going to depend. If you live in Tennessee where it floods a lot, guess what? You don't have to carry a lot of water, because there's water all over the place. You probably need a water filter so that you can filter that. But if you're out here, if you're in Moab, how much water is there? None. So now all of a sudden you got to carry more water and figure out the times that you're traveling, because traveling at 12, 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, probably not a great resource conservation thing there. Obviously, you're going to start sweating more and losing your electrolytes, so you start sheltering up during the day. Excuse me. So how much depends on your route? Your source to source. So you're either moving to a known source of water that's on your route, or you're carrying it with you, or you're following a stream or a river to get you to where you're at. If you can follow a river all the way into, if you get stuck on the Colorado River, you can just follow that all the way back to Moab City and you got plenty of water, right? But if you're out in the desert, then all of a sudden you don't have that option. And then have the electrolytes, you can add the water. So if you've got the little electrolytes that are available to you, there's a whole bunch of different strips and powdered and stuff that you can throw in the water. It makes a difference, and we figured that out running ultrathons too. Yep.
Those straws or water filters, or which would you recommend? I mean, we tested it on my son. We made him drink out of a fish pond. He said it tasted fine.
Life straw is great because it's very compact. So think back of what we were saying about ounces or pounds and feet and inches or feet. Life straw is really compact. It's small. It's lightweight. It's easy to carry. Easy to use. You need a pump so that you can fill up containers with it. I think they have an attachment now that's available, but you want to be able to, if you're at a water source that's a pond or something, and you've now all of a sudden got to hump it over the top of a hill or a mountain or something like that, you're going to want to have some water to go along with you.
They actually make one now. It's a soft water bottle with the filter as you suck out.
Oh, so it's clean as it goes. Yeah. So there you go.
Transport.
The biggie is, and they're coming out, we live in 2020, so it's like we live in like the most amazing time where it's like, get the stuff and try it out, probably on your son first. Here, try this. And then go from there, and then try it out and use your stuff. One, it's interesting and it's fun. You can justify the purchase to your wife. Look, I'm using it. And then also that it works. So when you actually need to use it, sitting out there in the dark trying to figure out the directions on how to do that is probably not the right time. So like one of the vehicles that I have is like the Dodge minivan, which it's a great vehicle, except for some wise guy engineer figured out that it was like, hey, instead of putting the spare where everybody else on planet Earth puts it, let's put it in the center of the vehicle and let's make it some weird Tetris origami game to figure out how to lower the tire. So figure that stuff out in the daylight, with a cold drink in your hand versus on a rainy side of a mountain at some point, cussing and swearing, trying to get that where your kids are screaming in the back seat.
So being in Utah, the only thing the caveat about using a water filter and testing it out and knowing how it works is if you put it away and put it in your vehicle and it freezes, it's dead. So don't let them freeze up.
Good to know.
Completely dry.
Good to know. I did not know that. So what is it? Is it rupturing the cells?
It expands it and allows enough contaminated water to flow past the stuff that it needs to go through.
Oh, well, that's very good to know. Thank you. Okay, injury. Are you carrying a first aid kit? You'll see the first aid kit is listed in there. It's super basic. It's on our ultra lightweight on there. And then do you know how to use the first aid kit? Okay, just because you have it doesn't mean that you're magically going to get osmosis at the time of when to use it. And then think about the common injuries of what we're talking about. Probably the biggest one is what? Sprained ankle, sprained knee. Probably the two biggest ones are maybe tweaking your back on the biggies. So do we know how that we can deal with those? Heat exhaustion, depending on where we're at or how hard we're working, or if we're not used to this level of physicality because we fly a desk in some cubicle somewhere, okay? Heat exhaustion becomes a very real thing. Know what the signs and symptoms are for that, how to treat that. Broken bone, God forbid, how are you going to deal with that? Do you know how to do a hasty splint so that you can fix that thing, so you can continue to move or help out a buddy that needs to move? Lacerations, Krazy Glue. I've used Krazy Glue on cuts on legs, on arms, on scalps, blisters. I mean, if it's not some big hairy, nasty, somebody got slashed with a Bowie knife, it'll work on there, and then you can get to the hospital and they can, open it back up if they need to. Just make sure it's clean. But it's better than bleeding all over the place or having an open wound that all of a sudden you're introducing a whole bunch of nastiness inside of there that's going to cause a crazy infection. Blisters that become lacerations, we talk about that, or a bee or a wasp sting. How many of you are allergic to bees? Do you carry an EpiPen?
No, I don't.
So probably in your bug out bag or your get home bag, have an EpiPen that's there, know how to use it, okay? So, or if you have family members that are allergic to bee stings or wasps, make sure you have that. My wife's friend just died from a bee sting. It's like 2020. It's like, how does that happen? He was on a farm. He got stung. He's kind of like, I think I'm going to be okay. Uh-oh, I'm starting to get hard breathing. And he was a little way from his house. He got into his house before he could dial the phone. He had closed up. He had swollen up shut and suffocated. So, 39-year-old man, in 2020 suffocated from a stinking little bug out there. So it does happen. It's a very real thing. Anaphylaxis, like some kids have peanut allergies. Now anaphylaxis can kick in from that as well. Sickness. Okay, so let's talk about the 4 antis. The 4 antis should be with you in your bag. Okay, the first one is your anti-inflammatory. Some of you older folks are more familiar with anti-inflammatories than some of you younger folks, but you will start to get to know them. The 2 biggies are ibuprofen and Tylenol, or acetaminophen. Okay, acetaminophen is technically not an anti-inflammatory, but we throw it in there anyways. It does a great job of blocking pain. It's great for fevers. You probably use kids' Tylenol for your kids when they get fevers or they get sick, they get uncomfortable. I just had the nastiness of the flu that knocked me down pretty hard for about 36 hours. I almost never take drugs, and I finally was like, I need some Tylenol. I took some Tylenol, and I was like, I'll be damned, that worked really well. And so, yeah, so have some Tylenol, have some ibuprofen. You can actually stack those 2 together, and they work synergistically so that you're killing pain as well as in the anti-inflammatory properties that's out there. So if all of a sudden, you've got time under stress and you've got to get to a point so that you can get to help, you can dose up with some anti-inflammatories and get to where you're going. Anti-diarrheal. So one of the big things we're talking about, water, diarrhea can hit you super fast. Just depends on whatever that bug was that was in the water. So having some anti-diarrheals with you may save the day. Remember, diarrhea, in 2020, diarrhea doesn't do anything. It's more of an inconvenience to most people. But the problem that you run into is, remember, diarrhea killed more men in the Civil War than bullets. Okay, so tens of thousands of men died from something as simple as diarrhea, because what happens is you can't hold on to your water, you're flushing all your out, and you die of heat exhaustion or heat stroke. Okay, it shuts down the body and destroys the liver. Okay, antiseptic, wash your hands and your body to avoid disease. You're probably going to have to go out there and use the bathroom while you're going there. Wash your hands before you get on there, because you don't want to end up kicking into the anti-diarrheal because you didn't wash your hands, okay, and you picked up the gombu from being unclean. Also, washing your hands and body will help detract from you running into rashes as well as fungal infections. One of the very real things, the guys that have a little bit bigger legs, you get chafing in between the legs, and staying clean underneath there is ways that you can ward off chafing. Chafing will slow you down like nobody's business. You guys all gotten chafing before? It's like somebody's taking a chainsaw to your crotch, and it is like, ooh, it is horrible. I was in basic training, and there was this old guy. He was 35, which is a young guy now, but he was 35. I was 17 at the time, and he's like, yeah. So Jeff, if you get some of that chafing, just put some of that rubbing alcohol on there. Be really liberal, and it'll be just fine. And I was like, okay, in the Army back in the day, right? It was like cotton BVDs and cotton fatigues, right? It's like everything that you don't want to have when you're moving, and so it just turned into like, this this sandpaper between your legs. So I'm walking around like a bulldog, and you get to that point where you're like, I'll do anything to make this go away. And I was like, I'm I'm going to try this alcohol. How bad can it be? It was bad. It was bad. It was bad, and it didn't really do anything for the chafing either. So there you go. I think it fried like some nerve endings, and that was about it. So, and then antibiotics. If you've got antibiotics with you, whatever that is, if you do get knocked down super bad because you ate something or you drank something that was nasty and it's just really crushing you, then the antibiotics that are there. So whether that's doxycycline or Cipro or penicillin or whatever that is, you know, you have that there so that you have that. So that's your 4 antis that you should have with you when you're with your bug out bag. Because remember, we're going from one place to another. We're not planning on living out there. Any question about that?
What is that President Coolidge?
Oh, yeah, thank you. So President Coolidge, this tells you how bad bacterial infections can get, right? So President Coolidge, so we're talking, it was the 1920s, President of the United States, son was playing tennis and got a splinter in his foot. I think it was about 10 days later, his son was dead because of infection from a splinter. So we live in a time where we're kind of spoiled on the stuff that we have. The stuff that used to wipe out, you know, millions of people before really doesn't touch us now. But that stuff, if all of a sudden you're out under stress, remember, as we go under stress, as the cortisol levels increase, so we get into the survival reflex, fight or flight, the cortisol levels go up so that we can survive. All of a sudden our immunity starts dropping down. That's why when you're stressed out at work or something like that, you tend to get sicker a little bit easier, because all of a sudden when you're dumping the cortisol that's in your body goes, hey, we don't need to worry about things like growth or immune system or stuff like that. We need to worry about surviving because we're getting ready to fight a saber-toothed tiger. Well, our body doesn't recognize a saber-toothed tiger or, you know, an ass of a boss. They both cause stress, right? And so that stress releases that cortisol, and all of a sudden it depresses our immune system. Well, the same thing happens out here if all of a sudden we're moving for 2-3 days because we got lost or whatever and we're trying to get our way back. Our immune system is all of a sudden going to get depressed. And little things like splinters and whatnot can become big deals. So that goes back, you get a splinter or something, you're getting into that antiseptic to make sure that thing stays clean and you're not getting a nasty infection. Good question. Good catch. Any other, you guys like my black and white PowerPoint slide? It's awesome. Usually I've got like pictures and bloody stuff in there, but I'm sorry, we're in the process of moving Ready Man, and so I've been busy. So, okay, so no destination or goal. Are we there yet? Dad, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? If we don't have a goal that we can tell our kids, all of a sudden we're weighing on their psychology and their emotions that are on there too. How happy are we when our kids are throwing fits? Not at all, right? It's like, you know, it's like going to the red line because they're screaming and you're just like, shut up, you know. You can't say that, but it's like, you know. So have that destination or that goal in mind, okay? Because if you don't, it's a major drain on the human psyche. You guys have all heard the thing is like make goals, write your goals down. So you make goals so that you've got a purpose of where you're going. You write your goals down because human beings, we're very visual. We like to see the visual representation. Part of that is because we're predators and we want to see that and we want to overcome that. And then we achieve that goal. Then all of a sudden, boom, we get a little bit of a dopamine hit that's there as well. So have a goal that's obtainable that you can get there and make it. And it can make all the difference in the world. And remember, your loved ones are going to be under even more duress than you are. So how are you going to deal with that? Okay? Kicking back into fight or flight and saying, suck it up, it's probably not going to work on your 6-year-old. Okay? And it's most certainly not going to work on your significant other. Okay? Starburst. Yeah, that's actually really good. Yeah, some candy, some games that are in there. What's that? Or duct tape and super glue. Okay, and then finally, training to bug out. So some of these should be the blinding flash of the obvious, right? Go hiking. I just read a thing that said that if you go hiking with your spouse, It was like fantastic for relationships and stuff because you get out and clean air and all that stuff. And the other nice thing is you're toughening your feet so they're ready for, time under stress, as well as you're building up your ankle strength as you're moving through, so you have less of a chance of twisting your ankle or your knee, and it also breaks in your shoes. So you can get like a quadruple whammy going on in there, and your significant other will love you for it too. Okay, walk with weight. We used to it was like 55 pounds is where it started, and you'd go all the way up to something stupid like 100 pounds, and you thought you were cool, and then you got older and you realized it wasn't cool because your back is screwed up. And so don't overdo it. Remember, stick to 10 or 20 pounds. Even if you're out there moving and you're getting ready for like an elk hunt or something like that, that amount of weight will do it for you. You just need a little bit of weight on your body. So now all of a sudden your body starts learning to compensate and deal with the different shifting of the weight that's on there. You don't have to get crazy while you do it. And then also I found out when I was training, so I went to an advanced land navigation course in the Army, which is a very fancy way of saying you're moving really fast for really long distances for like a week and a half. And it just like crushes you. And I figured out, I went the first time and I got my lunch money taken from me and sand kicked in my face. So I went back the second time but the second time what I'd done is I'd started biking. And so biking is very similar to walking, and it holds your feet in the in the straight position, so you're not doing the duck foot walk thing and screwing up your ankles. But you can also max out and build up the quads and the hamstrings. That's very similar to walking and your calves, and it's low impact. You can bike every single day and get away with it. You cannot rucksack march or walk with a load every single day. You can, and it will end up not doing you very good. But biking, like on a stationary bike, is fantastic for getting in shape and getting ready to walk. And then practice a plan. Use your map, make it interesting. Go, and if you're going out and you're gonna go walk, don't just go out and walk. Make sure that, or try and find new places. Use your GPS, get your GPS out there. Use your map. We just ran a Ready Man Challenge where we had some of the guys, not all the guys, we had some of the guys, they came in and they were like, okay, where you at? And they're like, I'm right here on my GPS. And it was like, okay, where's that? And they were like, well, it's right here. And it was like, okay, there's a map, where are you at? And it was like, I don't know, here, somewhere? Well, that's a mountain. Can you narrow it down? Okay, so know how to use that stuff and where you're at, because all of a sudden if you're crossing mountains or trails or stuff, being able to read that map and figure out, I don't want to walk that way because it's a cliff. I need to go this way and around. So you're not walking up to it and then coming back, okay? And you can also make this a game, so it makes it interesting. Any questions about that stuff so far?
So regarding the 10-20 pound thing for hiking, you made the comment about like training for elk hunting and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially on that, so when you down an elk or something, I mean, which you've probably done before, the quarters and stuff are more than 10 to 20 pounds. So how would you go about as far as for preparing yourself, on that notion to be able to actually sustain that weight and carry that weight if you are 14 miles deep?
Same way, because walking around, if you've got a back leg of an elk that's 50, 60 pounds, it's on your back or more, that's on your back, because you've had the stress on your shoulders from moving and on your weights, it doesn't take a lot to develop that strength and that endurance that's in there. You don't have to pile on the weight to be able to do that. Does that make sense? So think about it like a power lifter. How often does a power lifter go through and do a PR? Once every 6 months or something, where they're figuring out a PR. Well, why? Well, because if you tried to PR every single time, you just crush yourself. So the idea is back off on the weight, work smarter, not harder. And so then that way your body gets used to carrying a load, but you'd be amazed, it really doesn't take that much weight for your body to go, oh, okay, I'm starting to move, a little bit of weight on the shoulders. So now all of a sudden our atrioclavicular joint that's right here, that's getting weighed down, now it starts strengthening up. So, you guys that have worn backpacks for a while, or you stopped wearing a backpack and then you went out hiking and you're like, oh man, my shoulders are killing me. Well, it's those AC joints, or all of a sudden you've been stretching those things out. Well, now all of a sudden you're letting your body know, hey, I'm using this stuff and we're going through. It's called the sympathetic response. So if you ever have knee surgery and you go in, they like you to do physical therapy beforehand. You'll work both legs to get them strength, and then you get knee surgery or whatever, and you come back in and they'll put you back on the leg extension or whatnot, but they'll have you work the leg that didn't get worked on, because by working this leg, your body goes, oh, we're working our legs, and it actually tricks your body into flushing more blood and strength into both of those until the other one can catch up. Good question. Any other questions?
GPS. What's your preferred GPS?
Garmin. I think it's the 201 or 401 that goes on your wrist. 401. Yeah. I mean, it's super. It's small. It's lightweight. The batteries last a long time. It's the one I used in the war, so I'm probably biased towards that. But Garmin makes really bomber stuff. Also, the Rhino is fantastic if you've got a couple of different people in your party. The Rhino is a GPS, but it's also as a two-way walkie-talkie or walkabout. But the cool thing is I can project my waypoint out to you. So if I'm talking to Eric and I'm like, hey, where are you at? He can send me his coordinate, and I can look at it, and then I can plot that as a waypoint and navigate to him, which is really cool. We actually had another Ready Man challenge that we were on. We had one of the guys in our party got lost, and we had the Rhinos, and if we hadn't had those, he would have we had a blizzard that came in. If we hadn't had the Rhinos, we'd have most definitely, been going to a funeral about a week later. So yeah, the Rhinos are fantastic.
So all that's actually capable with your cell phone as well. Every cell phone now has a GPS.
Yep.
Every cell phone has GPS in it, but by using Google and utilizing Google Maps and Google Earth that runs strictly off of your GPS, you can actually download a synchronized location, and everybody that downloads that particular location, you can actually share what are home groups for it. So you guys can actually transmit data back and forth as long as it's simple pin.
That's awesome.
And anywhere that you go, we've used it for years, and it's absolutely free. And we've never had any issues with it, whether it be down south or whether it be all the way up in the Uintas, 22 miles in.
That's awesome.
So.
Yeah, 2020, right? I mean, it's amazing stuff. Yep.
What did you mean duct tape can help your feet?
So duct tape, putting duct tape over known hotspots. A hotspot is a place on your foot. As you get to know your shoes or your equipment, you're like, hey, I know, I've got like spurs on the back of my heels. I know that that's a hot spot for me. So you can, prior to it being a hot spot, you can hit it with moleskin or duct tape, because the duct tape is slick, and it will reduce that friction down so that you don't develop a blister. So a blister is nothing more, like if you rub your hands together, you'll eventually blister because of the heat that's taking place there. Same thing that's on your feet.
What was the name of that backpack that you liked the most, the tan one?
This one?
Yeah.
This is actually BattleBox put this out. Yeah, I'm sure they probably have them on their site. It's relatively lightweight. It's got an internal frame. It actually breathes really well on there. I was actually, when I first got it, I was kind of like, the zipper looked a little bit not robust enough, and then I started going out and using it. It was like, oh, that thing actually works pretty stinking good. So, surprise.
Is it a ballistic panel worth the weight?
Depends. Am I escaping a wildfire, or am I escaping the apocalypse? Am I traveling through, a seedy part of town, or am I out in Moab? So that's kind of a personal thing of where you're at. It may be, a ballistic panel that's in your computer bag may do it enough. So it's kind of goes back to what we're talking about, is kind of depends on where you're at in the situation.
But you did say 20 pounds with your food and your water?
Without water.
Without.
Yep, without water, yeah. And there's a list on the back where everything's weighed out. It kind of printed off a little bit small, but you'll see it. But you guys can contact me, and I'll send it to you as well. So you'll see this. There's the main list that's there, on foot backpack bug out checklist. Okay, you'll see some of the stuff that's in there is is multi-purpose, like the trash bag. Super lightweight, but man, you can use a trash bag for just a ton of different stuff. I mean, it's a waterproof bag, it's a flotation device, it's a poncho, it's a tent, you know, it's all kinds of stuff that's on there. And you can go through and look at that. You know, we like the ultralight alcohol stove, a little bit of alcohol that's on there. It tends to work. They look like the penny stoves that are on there, the Japanese, I forget the name of the one that we have, but it burns, I mean, it's great. You carry around a little bit of denatured alcohol, prime it up, throw a match on it, and away you go. But you can go through there and look at this stuff. And then as you go through on that list that we gave you guys, you've got packs and bags, and then we've got, some of this is a little bit dated. We put this list together about 2 years ago, and we just show you what we like to use. So that, you know, that the Osprey Exos or Six Moons Gatewood Cape or whatever for tent bivy sack, and down you go. You can see on your extra socks the darn Toughs that are there as well. So it gives you some ideas. You know, you can go, Amazon obviously is a fantastic resource for getting reviews and whatnot on there. And then the emergency blanket, you know, Jason, he wanted to go super lightweight. You see the knife is a Spyderco Ladybug because he's like, look, that's all I need for putting together like a feather stick. I don't need to carry a Bowie knife, and putting together like a feather stick for making fires, or even if you have to skin like a fish or something like that, you know, a little Ladybug will do it, you know. Cash, obviously, and then backup wood stoves, and then you know, we talk about water, you know, water flavor because of palate fatigue that can take place. You know, the water filter, the Life Straw that's we got on there, you know, fill your water bottles. Solar charger, you know, in case for your phone or for your GPS. So you're taking that advantage. Solar chargers are super inexpensive at this point, so you can throw them on there. They don't charge as fast as you would hope, but it's a whole lot better than, you know, praying to the big man for some juice. Okay, and then personal hygiene, we talk about that. Toothbrush, toothpaste, there's 2 reasons why we put that on there. One, it's part of the psychological, you know, we're used to having clean mouths and clean teeth, but then also 2, they figured out in hospitals, people that are in hospitals, if they brush their teeth, if they're laid up in the hospital for, you know, for long periods of time, if they brush their teeth, they can actually cut the incidence of pneumonia drastically down by simply brushing the teeth. So it's one of those things of getting rid of the, you know, the bacteria and stuff that they can grow in the mouth. Whoops. There's my 5-year-old. So, what are your questions? Right on time. Yeah.
Do you have a specific brand of electrolyte that you like?
I would check out, you know, because the electrolytes are getting better and better all the time. That probably one of the best resources is go down to one of the running stores and ask those guys. Hammer. Hammer's a good one.
Liquid IV is really good. You get it both from Costco.
What is it?
Liquid IV.
Liquid IV. I just bought a bunch of Liquid IV. Yeah, I bought it because I was like, oh, I may need that if I get, so I grabbed it. So they're coming out with new stuff all the time, but the runners are the ones that, those guys are figuring that stuff out all the time. They're constantly like trying new stuff.
So when you say you're going to go for a couple days and you don't take any food, when would you plan for taking food and plan for not taking food?
48 hours, depending on what you're, you know, how long you're going. I mean, the food is minimal that you saw in here. There was like high density caloric value stuff that was on there. It was like a survival bar or something that was on there. After you start going much past about 2 days, especially as you're exercising and whatnot, you really start, you know, you start gnawing on the wall because you start getting really hungry. And then you start going over into that psychological side of like, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. So
for like a 5-day trip, would you plan for 5 days or would you plan for 3 or 4 days?
3 or 4. Yeah, 3 or 4. And I'd limit that down to increase the caloric value, but decrease the number of meals that you're eating. So high fats, high carbohydrates.
Well, what about a small rifle, if you're going for 3 or 4 days, instead of taking that weighted food, drop a rabbit, drop a bird.
You can. When we were doing our bug out stuff, we carried, some of the guys carried rifles, some of the guys carried pistols. The 20 pounds doesn't include a firearm. If you're fleeing your home for whatever reason, we recommend have some means of self-defense. I mean, everybody here probably has some means of defense.
Extra mags, but I just want a rifle for that long shot that you ain't gonna get with that pistol.
Sure can, yeah. And again, it kind of dictates. If I'm walking through more of an urban setting, a pistol's probably more appropriate versus, I keep mentioning Moab, but I'm in Grand Junction or something like that. Probably like a rifle would be more appropriate for something like that. The idea is keep the weight down as much as possible. So it's not, you probably don't need a 300 Win Mag with a heavy barrel on there, Or maybe you do.
Like I'm sure most of us in our cars and whatnot, we've got things prepared. We've got our rifles, we've got first aid, we've got maybe APCs. How do you decide when to leave that stuff or when to take that? Like if I'm stuck and I have 2 days of travel to go, what do I leave? What do I take?
Again, think about, so lightweight, if you figure I'm 48 hours from where I'm going to get to, it's time under stress. So, I mean, I'm going to make it funny, but you probably don't need the tire jack to go with you. You probably don't need the tow strap. You probably don't need the, whatever that is. Water, if there's anything that I would probably overstock on, it'd be water, because it's really easy to get rid of it. If I can just slam it and all of a sudden I don't have that weight on me anymore. And so, slam it, drink it, and I don't have that weight on anymore. So, but that's the idea is understand where you're at and where you're going, what your destination is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, everything's just totally imperative to your objective. You bring and then leave everything behind.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need.
Right. Because if you don't need it, you don't need it. So, yeah.
I'm a freak. I like to be prepared for everything.
Yeah. Well, it was like, I was telling you guys, like the early days of the war, it's like with chest racks on, it was like, you're this big and you barely fit in the vehicles and stuff like that. And then it took about not very long and it was like, I don't need all this crap. And then I had like a little backpack that was about this big that all of my assault gear, my extra assault gear went into, and it was, in a chest rack, and that was it. And everything for fighting right here, and then anything extra was in this little backpack that I'd run around with. And that was water, gel, caffeine pills, extra med, extra explosives, and stuff to make fire because we'd destroy stuff on target. And that was it. So, so we really, just the bare essentials is what we're doing.
So we talked a lot about things to include, and you talked about paring things down. What are some things that you think you had originally that you thought would be very useful that you eventually eliminated? Things that maybe people have in their packs now where you're like, it seemed like a good idea, it turns out it was completely useless or not practical.
Too much of stuff. So like, a pocket knife, a fixed blade knife, and then a Leatherman, all of that stuff starts to add up, like extra socks. Out here in the West, you don't really need extra socks. You lay them out and 30 minutes they're dry. Whereas in Tennessee, you probably better bring some extra socks because they're going to get wet and nasty or something like that. And so more dependent on that. We used to carry too much food. Guys that throw in extra MREs, 2-3 MREs. Well, now all of a sudden, remember the inches equal feet. Well, it's compact and stuff, but it's now all of a sudden, and guess, there's this amazing thing that happens with human psychology. Whereas if I have a backpack that's big, guess what happens? It gets filled up, doesn't it? And so it's like, and then all of a sudden you're carrying a whole bunch of stuff. So sometimes smaller is better. That's why I limited myself to that little pack, because I could throw it on, I could throw it off and run around and do stuff with it. For a while I had a bag that was literally this big, that was a single strap one that I could spin around and get at and stuff. But food was the biggie. Too much med was another biggie. Too much ammo, believe it or not, was another biggie because it just weighs you down. Good question. Yep.
How did you eventually get out of your sticky situation in Africa?
Oh. Well, so funny enough, cell phones work in Africa. Calling in a guy that was he was a private aircraft. So we ended up calling back a couple of different places, and then this private aircraft flew in, and the guy was running questionable supplies back and forth. And so basically threw him a bunch of cash and climbed on board and flew out. So, about the very next morning, actually. So that's how. A lot of quick talking and a lot of tap dancing and got out of there. So.
You have a preferred caliber for bug out, like 9mm, 5.56, 300 blackout?
That's funny. So this is a hotly contested thing. If you get into the forums, that it's like, man, it's like you called somebody's mom like a bad name or something. And it's like, geez, calm down. Probably, we presented this in the Ready Men group. We have a closed group that's called the Ready Men, and it's actually very active. I invite all of you to jump in there, and we presented that. And probably the single best argument that I heard for a caliber was 12 gauge, 12 or 20 gauge, because it's so versatile. Are you going to get into a firefight with marauders? Probably not. But are you going to see a bird that you could eat? Probably so. And trying to shoot a bird with a 22 is a lot harder than a 20 gauge or a 12 gauge. And so,
You got material to use.
you got,
For the shells.
yeah, and it's really easy to reload and stuff like that. But and it was one of those. I'm a big AK guy, so I was like, oh, you need to. But I mean, I heard I looked at the guy's rationale, and I was like, man, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You can do a lot with a shotgun. Do a whole lot with a shotgun.
Is there a knife that you found, just a pocket knife, everyday carry knife that you found holds up to, what is it?
I've carried a cold steel Vaquero for 20 years, probably. I've never been in a knife fight with it, but I've done hella on cardboard with it. and it just, I love this knife. I mean, they figured out the serrations and it goes through cardboard like crazy. And as far as like a utility knife, because you'll snap the weak tip, but because of the shape of the blade, it cuts when you pull. And so, I mean, it's a great fighting knife too, but if you're into that, but for a utility knife, it's fantastic. It's great knife. Yeah, cold steel, as far as, it's pretty hard to beat. If you want to go to the custom stuff, I mean, you're never going to beat a custom knife. But as far as like mass-produced, inexpensive stuff, I mean, it's pretty hard to beat cold steel. When this gets dull, I mean, I sound like a millennial, but when this gets dull, I throw it away and I just buy another one, because it's like, I can sharpen it or I can just buy another one. Okay, if there's no other questions, I don't want to hold you guys too long. I'll be here for a little bit, so feel free to come up and bend my ear. I appreciate you guys all coming out here. I hope you learned something, or at least got you to think about something. There's these pamphlets or these paper things. They're yours to keep. Please get in there, beat them up. If you find something that improves on it, let us know, because we'll tweak. We don't profess to have figured out gravity or anything, and we're constantly learning ourselves on this stuff. And so, share the information with us and with the rest of the tribe that's out there too, so that people are smarter as well. And then, and I think that's it. If I brought a couple of some of my books. If you haven't read it, then come grab me. And if you say nice things about me, maybe I'll give you one. But other than that, we just released our fifth book in that series. So I'll entice you to read that. It's a group of short stories that happens in the same time frame. We got a bunch of other authors together to write for the Black Autumn universe. And it was really, again, in the spirit of building our tribe and our community, we brought in a bunch of, some of them were known authors and others were just budding brand new authors that we brought in. So it's think it's 15 short stories is what it ended up being. So, but it's pretty cool. We just released that on Amazon. It was a #1 bestseller on Amazon for a few days, and then got bumped off the top. But so yeah, that's it. Thank you.